Good morning. Today is the 18th day of Tishrei, the 3rd of October, and we're up to the third reading of Parashat Vezot Bracha, or just Bracha as it's called many times. And the entire reading is just a couple of verses, a few verses, not a couple, but a few, and it's all about Joseph's blessing. Now, Joseph has two tribes, as you remember, and Moses mentions this at the very end, that they are the thousands, they are the myriads or tens of thousands of Ephraim and the thousands of Menashe, Joseph's two sons. But the blessing here is very personal. He does something here that he didn't do in other blessings at all, nothing similar at all. And this is in verse 16. So we're in Deuteronomy 33 verse 16, and he says like this: with the bounty of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of the one who dwells in the bush, may these rest on the head of Joseph, on the crown of the elect of his brothers. What is he talking about? The bounty of the earth and the favor of the presence of the one who dwells in the bush. So, commentaries and the Talmud, everybody says this. Moses is referring to his first encounter with God. He's referring to the burning bush. And he's saying that somehow the will of the one who dwells in the bush should be upon the head of Joseph and the crown of the one who is chosen amongst his brothers. There's a very special relationship between Moses and Joseph. It didn't start now. If you remember, before they left Egypt, so Moses fulfilled the vow that the Jewish people had taken to take Joseph's bones, his remains, out of Egypt and bring them to the land of Israel. And there's a lot of different midrashim about this, how Moses exactly did this, and where were his remains, and why was it difficult to do it. But in the end, we have this interesting picture that throughout the years in the wilderness, as they were traveling, Moses had two, let's call them two crates with him. The one crate was the Ark of the Covenant, and that held the tablets, the first tablets that were shattered, and the second tablets. And he had another crate, which was the remains of Joseph. This is a very interesting thing. By the way, there are many different legal teachings that are taken from this, because Moses was what we call the encampment of the divine presence. He's the tribe of the Levites, but he's also closest to the tabernacle. But even just the encampment of the Levites is what we call, what later became the Temple Mount, meaning the same laws that were relevant to the encampment of the Levites in the wilderness. The Levites encircled the tabernacle, were transported later to the layout of the Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount itself is considered to be the encampment of the Levites. And there are certain things that you have to do. One of them that we learn from this is that in or on the Temple Mount, it is permissible to have the remains of a human, meaning a dead person. And this is something that's very surprising, because you wouldn't think that would be permitted. It's supposed to be very sanctified and very holy. But there's a very interesting thing that Moses was carrying Joseph's remains with him throughout their travels in the wilderness. But I want to come here to a different explanation from the one that the commentaries on the verse itself say. This is from the sages, and the sages say like this: what does it mean that the will of the one who dwells in the bush? The bush in Hebrew is sneh. So first of all, there's a very interesting relationship between Moses and the bush itself and the sneh, because the sneh equals in Hebrew sin, Samech Nun Hey equals 115, and 3 times 115, sneh is equal to Moshe, 345. So it's almost like it's a deeper relationship than we realize at first. It's not by mistake that God appeared to Moses through the burning bush in the beginning as the first example of his prophecy. But the word sneh is also, by the way, later it becomes Sinai. Sinai is based on the same word. Sneh and Sinai are literally from the same root. And so what at first was a revelation at the burning bush, the sneh, became the revelation of the Torah, giving the Torah at Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai itself is almost like a development of Moses' first prophecy, first revelation of the divine presence. But there's another meaning to this word sneh, and that's the one that the sages and the Talmud explain. They say that it actually comes from the word hatred. Hatred is sin'ah. And sneh, even though it's written with a different letter, it doesn't matter. There's certain letters in Hebrew that interchange because they sound exactly the same. One of them is the sin and the samech. They sound exactly the same. So, u'etzon shochni sneh means the will of the one who wants to dwell among those who hate him. That's the explanation here. Moses, when he ran away from Egypt, saw himself in a position almost like Joseph's, where he had a vision for the Jewish people, and that vision was chased away, in the same way that Joseph had a vision about him becoming the ruler and providing everyone, and he ended up being sold into slavery in Egypt and so on. And Moses made the reverse journey. Instead of, he started out in Egypt, and he had to flee because of those who had informed the authorities about what he had done. Because his vision was one of liberty and equality for the Jewish people. And what he understood was that his people were against this. So his first vision of God, his first prophecy, was in a sense foretelling this or revealing this latent secret that he had, which was that he wanted to conquer the hearts of those who he thought hated him. It turned out in the end that these were really two people, Datan and Aviram, who ended up really being antagonists to Moses throughout the journey into the wilderness, until eventually they perished with with Korach and his cohort. Joseph had the same thing. Joseph also wanted to dwell. He wanted to be accepted by those who hated him, not because he needed what we would say like people to recognize him, to give him his due credit and so on. He really wanted to do this because he felt that his vision and what his abilities were something that would be very useful for everyone. And that was his overriding purpose in life. And eventually he did it. It's very interesting that even though he was sold into slavery, he spent 12 years in a pit. When he finally came out and became the viceroy of Egypt, that didn't affect at all his relationship with his brethren. And he provided for them, and he made sure to bring them down to where he could provide for them in Egypt. And so that was one of the overriding principles that Moses and Joseph shared together, that they want to come to a state in which they are accepted by those who hate them. Now, just to see how this actually played out later, there's a very interesting Mishnah in Megillah, in the tractate of Megillah, and there it says like this: the difference between the tabernacle in Shiloh and the temple in Jerusalem. So, if you remember, for 369 years after the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, the tabernacle was constructed with a stone building and a roof that was made of the same drapes that the tabernacle was made out of, in the city of Shiloh, which was in the inheritance, in the lands of Joseph. So the difference between the tabernacle in Shiloh and the temple that was later erected in Jerusalem is only listen to this, that in Shiloh, one eats offerings of lesser sanctity and the second tithe in any place that overlooks the tabernacle. What it means is, and we actually were there this summer, whoever was there, remember there were hills all around it. And it's in a low place, so that there's a lot of hills around overlooking it. And whereas in Jerusalem you could only eat these sacrifices of lesser sanctity within the walls of Jerusalem, in Shiloh that wasn't the case. You could eat them anywhere that you could see Shiloh from, in principle. There's a little bit of a discussion about this, exactly how it works. But the whole idea was that Joseph is constantly producing for everyone. He's always trying to take care of all his brethren. In fact, that's the way we understand this concept of Mashiach ben Yosef, of a redeemer who is a son, who is a pedigree of Joseph. These are the peoples, the individuals who throughout our history in exile have always dedicated themselves not to their own well-being, but rather to providing for everyone else. And this idea that you can eat these sacrifices of lesser sanctity anywhere that you can see Shiloh from is exactly that. There's no limit on the provision. It tries to get to everyone, including, like we said, those that hate him, those that are not at peace with him. And that was always Joseph's principle of action. That was always what he was about. There's another point here that's very important. What does it mean, offerings of lesser sanctity? So in the Talmud and any of the commentaries, you'll see that this includes individual peace offerings, meaning somebody brought a shlamim, a peace offering, a korban todah, a sacrifice of thanksgiving, which is mostly made out of bread, usually, but you could also bring an animal, and the paschal lamb. Those have lesser sanctity, and so these could be eaten anywhere that you could see Shiloh from. But there's another meaning to something of lesser sanctity. The idea here is, and this is exactly the way that the Mashiach, son of Joseph, always looks at things, there are also people who are of lesser sanctity. not just that the sacrifice was of lesser sanctity, but you look at the person himself and you say, oh, he doesn't do this and he doesn't do that and he doesn't study. Joseph doesn't see those differences. Joseph wants to provide for everyone. And so Moses says to him, the same revelation that I had at the burning bush, the revelation that told me I need to come for all the Jewish people without any difference between their level of observance or their commitment or whatever it is, I'm here for them. That is what I place on your head. That is what I am blessing you with. And indeed, from that day on, that is exactly how we understand the principle of Mashiach ben Yosef. There's a lot of people who, I don't know that I necessarily am one of them. I'm just telling you that there are many people who identify the state of Israel with a type of Mashiach ben Yosef. And the whole idea is that it doesn't differentiate between Jews. It doesn't say, well, you're more observant, so we accept you, you're less observant, and so on. That is the role of Mashiach, the son of Joseph. He's always there to spiritually not segregate. He's always there to give to everyone equally. And that's a very important principle that in his blessing Moses gives and appropriates to the tribes of Joseph, Menashe, and Ephraim. Thank you for joining me today. Hope to see you tomorrow.